Beautiful, soft, supple, amazing white bread, loaded up with lots of sharp cheddar cheese and jalapenos, and baked in an oak-fired offset smoker, all constituting my first attempt at what I guess I'll call smoked cheddar jalapeno bread. I've been wondering, could I bake bread in my smoker, much like I would in an oven? At its core, an offset smoker is pretty much just an oven that happens to be fueled by burning hardwood, and of course, that smoke from that wood being allowed to access the food. But basically, it's just an oven, so I figured, in principle, it has to work. What I'm not sure about is just how much smoke flavor is going to absorb into that dough, especially at first when the dough is very kind of wet and I'll say absorbable. So in trying to decide what kind of bread to make, I thought it made perfect sense to go with something like a jalapeno cheddar bread, which fits right in line thematically with smoked food. But I didn't want to go with cornbread or any of the other quick breads, and most of the jalapeno cheese bread recipes out there seem to be sort of in that category. I wanted a real, legitimate yeast bread, and not one of those kind of overly tough, super crusty, and no-knead recipes that are also pretty popular on the internet. So I've taken one of my sort of go-to white bread recipes and modified it such that, at least I hope, it'll work as my smoked jalapeno cheddar bread. So let's jump right into this thing and start making our bread dough. Before starting to put together the dough for this bread, a little prep work is needed. First, I need to chop up some jalapeno, so I'll just get to removing the seeds and cutting them up. I'm going for something smaller than a dice, but bigger than a mince. I guess we'll just say finely chopped. Next up, I need to shred some cheese. Using my box grater, I'll shred up a whole 8-ounce block of Tillamook sharp cheddar. You can really use any brand or type of cheddar you want, and pre-shredded bags of cheese will work. But the anti-caking ingredients that are added to it might affect how it acts and tastes in this bread recipe. I'm not sure. Now to start the dough. The first thing I'll do is get my liquids heated up to 105 degrees Fahrenheit in the microwave. In the case of this recipe, that's water and whole milk. And into the warm liquid goes my yeast. And I always proof the yeast just to make absolute sure that it's alive and healthy. So I'll leave this alone for 5 to 10 minutes until the surface begins blooming and getting nice and foamy. At which time I'll throw in all my other dry ingredients: sugar, dough conditioner, kosher salt, and all-purpose flour. And don't worry about the quantities. I'll include the full recipe with all quantities and measurements in the video description below. With my dough hook in place in the mixer, I'll run it on low speed for about a minute just to start getting all the wet and dry ingredients combined. At which time, in goes a couple tablespoons of softened butter, and I'll run it for about another minute. Now to throw in 1/3 cup of the chopped jalapeno, though in hindsight I think I should have used about double that amount, and about half of the shredded cheese. Run the mixer another minute, and then add in most of the rest of my cheese, but reserving enough of it to sprinkle all over top of the bread later. Now I'll crank the speed of the mixer up to medium and let it knead away for 5 full minutes. When that's done, I'll turn out my dough onto a floured surface. At this point, the dough is quite loose, wet, and floppy, and I'll end up patting a little more flour into it, just enough that it doesn't completely stick to the board or my fingers, but not too much. The dough should be somewhat sticky. I'll form the dough into a ball, spray a bowl with some cooking spray, and drop in the dough. Cover the bowl with some plastic wrap, and leave it alone so it can rise for 1 hour. After 1 hour, the dough is about doubled in size, and we can once again turn it out onto a floured surface. I'll press the dough down and squish it out to degas a bit before shaping it into somewhat of a flat rectangle or oval. To form it into a loaf shape, I'll just sort of tightly roll it up into a log that's about as long and wide as my loaf pan. And since I am cooking this in a smoker, I figured the cast iron bread pan was the way to go. So I'll lightly grease the entire inner surface of the pan with a bit of olive oil, and then I'm dropping in that loaf. I'll cover the whole pan with some greased plastic wrap and leave it alone for its second rise, 30 more minutes. And while that's happening, I can get my smoker lit and brought up to temperature. So into the firebox goes some lump hardwood charcoal and a few small oak splits. I need to get the smoker temp up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or slightly hotter. Now the dough is almost ready to bake. Just 2 more things to do. First, I'll brush the top surface with some whole milk. I may not have needed this step considering what I'm going to do next, but it can't hurt anything. And that next step is to sprinkle my remaining cheddar cheese all over the top of the loaf. Not a ton, just enough to make a thin layer of cheese on top. And the smoker is ready, so in goes the bread. And just for the heck of it, I'll stick one of my probe thermometers into the dough just so I can be sure to pull it out the moment it hits an internal temp of 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Since the temperature of a smoker like this isn't always exactly consistent in temperature, I didn't want to base my cook on time alone. In the meantime, I will do my best to keep the smoker temp between 350 and 375 degrees. After what ended up being exactly 38 minutes, my bread is done and looking incredible. It definitely muffin topped a bit, but that did not end up being any sort of a problem. So I'll bring this baby back into the house and I'll let it sit a while until the cast iron pan is cool enough to touch. At which time I'll pop the bread out of there and let it sit on a wire rack to finish cooling. Finally, the bread is cool and it's time to slice in and see how we did. This is one seriously soft and squishy loaf of bread. There is a light crust on top from that cheddar cheese, but it's not hard. Everything about this is light, fluffy, and amazing. And when I go in for a close-up, you can see why I mentioned probably adding more jalapenos. It seemed like plenty when I threw them in, but I'm only seeing a bit here and there within the crumb of that bread. The jalapeno taste is definitely there, but it's pretty mild. And the same goes for the cheese. I probably wouldn't add more because this came out so great and I wouldn't want to mess with the structure by adding more fatty, melty cheese. But it's got a very pleasant and subtle cheese taste throughout, with an extra kick of cheese flavor in that top crust. As far as the smokiness goes, it's incredibly subtle. In any case, I couldn't really be happier with how this smoked cheddar jalapeno bread came out. Man, that is about as soft and supple and beautiful of a piece of bread that I could even hope for. And the flavor is outstanding. I'm really glad I did the layer of cheese on top. I thought maybe it would risk burning, but it is absolutely perfect. Honestly, I probably could have gone with a little more jalapeno. I tend to err on the side of caution with that sort of thing because I'm pretty much a lightweight when it comes to spiciness, including with jalapenos. But it's pretty sparse in there, and it's definitely not a majorly prominent flavor in the bread. I could have stood with a little bit more. But I was thinking about what would be the perfect actual use for this bread. And just putting some butter on it, I don't know. Obviously not a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Maybe a piece of toast. Then it occurred to me, of course, a grilled cheese sandwich. I could think of no better use for this bread than to make an otherwise ordinary grilled cheese sandwich, so that's what I'm gonna do right now. Nothing fancy, absolutely straightforward. Cut a couple slices, butter them, throw them on the flat top with some American cheese. And I gotta tell you, that is absolutely the way to go. I don't think I've ever had a grilled cheese sandwich that I enjoyed quite as much as this one. I thought maybe it wasn't jalapeno-y enough when I just kind of ate it by itself, but made into a grilled cheese sandwich, there's just something about the cheesy flavor that really brings out the jalapeno taste, and I think it is absolutely perfect. In fact, I think that grilled cheese sandwiches are now going to be the reason that I make this bread in the future. I will say, as the bread started toasting up on that flat top, some of the cheese that's within the bread seemed like it wanted to start melting a little bit, almost sticking to the griddle just slightly. But let it get nice and hot, slap it on there, make sure to take care when flipping it, and it ended up working out just fine. So anyway, that's about it. I went into this as a sort of food experiment, and I definitely am saying that the concept is proven, and this is a absolutely worthwhile bread recipe to try making. And as always, I'll put a link to the full printable recipe in the video description below if you want to try making this thing exactly the way that I did here. And be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future food and bread making videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.